Okay, good morning. So today I wanted to further the conversation on having financial structure. I know I mentioned the subject of budgeting, and I'm sure many people are wondering, okay, what is a budget? So I always like to use this simple equation to explain what a budget is, and that is a budget equal income minus expenses minus savings. Budget equal income minus expenses minus savings. Now you would ask me, why am I minusing, or why am I subtracting savings from income? Now, your savings is a temporary, is like a delayed expense, because eventually you're going to, you know, allocate it to something, whether it's an investment or an essential expense or something. So it's more or less like a delayed expense. So, and somebody will ask, what is the best percentage? So I always say that your expenses must never exceed 70% of your income. No matter how small your income is, you should always work towards not expending more than 70%. Now, this means that you would have 30% to work with for your savings and maybe um, other charity activities. Now, take note, your savings can never go towards charity. Your savings is like a seed. Now, the expense part is like the bread. So, like the Bible says, that God gives seed to the sower and bread to the eater. Your expense part of that equation is your bread, and it means that that's what you eat, that's what you can share from, and the remaining part, which is your savings, is the part that should not go to charity. In other words, any charity that cannot be done from within the expense part of your budget, it means you don't have the capacity to do it. Now, I've seen people borrow money to do charity. You borrow money on behalf of other people, and it's never made any sense to me, because it's more or less like you're putting yourself on the line, and most of the time it never ends well. You can check, you will see that most of the resentment you have towards your friends or family was because of times that you went out of your way to take a loan on their behalf and they ended up not paying. Now, this is very common, right? So, if, for example, I have said that if your income is a particular amount, your expense must not exceed 70% of that income. Now, depending on how aggressive you are with your savings, sometimes you might want to reduce your expense further. Like what I said in my previous videos, when I was earning 38,000 naira, my aim when I crafted my budget was to never exceed 18,000. 18,000 is just slightly below 50% of my income at the time. Now, that was because I wanted to aggressively save towards, maybe a new course or a new, certification or something that gets me out of that phase, right? So I was aggressively saving about 55% of my income at the time, almost 60% even, and um, now that sometimes may be difficult for a lot of people. I've heard people say, "Oh, but I don't have enough spare cash to work with." Now, savings is not supposed to come from spare cash. Who has spare cash these days? So it means that your savings is the first line item. That's the first thing you take out of your income, because if you wait till after you have expended before you take a savings, you will have nothing to take out. So the best thing is to take out savings first, and then you can take expenses after, right? So it's best to set up your financial structure in such a way that it's just something that's simple. You don't need to do any complex. Of course, along the line, when you begin to mature into the process, you can then make specific adjustment. So for example, my savings are several layers. So I'm not just saving in one basket. I have multiple baskets where I'm saving money for different purposes, right? And that is the purpose of your savings, right? So if you have a project, maybe you want to buy a new ring for your wife, or you want to buy something for your kids, and you can't afford it in the interim, you can create a container for that. So your savings can have multiple containers, and that also creates something in your mind. Your mind tends to believe that what you're doing is going to come to you. What you're creating a container for is going to come to you. I remember one of my friends 2 years ago bought a 100 million house, and a lot of people were asking, how did you do it, and all of that. And he reminded me of some years before then, when he started saving for the house. He started with as little as 5,000, and it sounded very foolish at the time. But what he was doing is he was making his mind be fixated on that outcome. And it was not surprising that opportunities showed up that gave him the room to complete that dream. And that is how you must think about your savings. Your savings are like seed. So every container you create and you put your seed in it, you are creating room for certain things to happen, right? And like I said, your income is the biggest problem you have. The higher your income relative to your income, the higher your expenses relative to your income, the more or the less room you have for growth, right? So the more aggressive you are about growth, the lower your expenses should be. Now, I said the other day that I would rather wear rags for a season and then have abundance for the rest of it than wear designers now and then struggle to clothe myself later. It's just a trade-off. Some call it delayed gratification, where you pause some things for the moment so that you can have more of it in the future. I remember when I started trading crypto, and I was making quite a bit decent money every day. At that time, I used to have one shoe that I used to wear everywhere. That shoe suffered in my hands. That shoe, I bought it 1,500 naira at Iyanoba, and I've worn it for several years. Now, I love shoes a lot. That's like the thing that I can spend all my money on and not have regrets. So I love shoes a lot, right? And I used to make sure that when I go to malls and I see shoes, I turn away from there, because in that season, I didn't want to spend money on shoes. Now, fast forward several years after that, I have so many shoes, I sometimes forget some of them are even in my shelf, and that is the power of delayed gratification. So it gives you room to grow, because in this case, when I started saving 50% of my income, when I changed jobs and my income doubled, I was able to stay at the level of what I was earning and kept the increase in savings. And that's why when opportunities started showing up, it was easy for me to try things out and go into some of these things. And that is why I believe that if you can implement this simple, which means if you're going to have a working budget, you need to track everything. All your incomes, you need to track them within a period. All your expenses, you need to track them as well. Because most of the time, what happens is we just know that we have one income, but we don't know what happens with our expenses. Sometimes it exceeds what it should be. So for me, what I always advise is, once you have pegged what your income should be, you do your best to stay within that boundary. And I can tell you for free that it works, right? You can check most people who are wealthy today, they started from that point. Because once you're able to control your expenses, you will create room for growth. Yeah, so we'll further this conversation in other videos. Thank you for listening and have a great day ahead.